My name's Frank Armstrong. I didn't grow up in this house that awakens some curiosity. I grew up in a suburban house just around the corner until about 1992, when my father developed the harebrained scheme to move into a different house nearby, which was then known to us as a kind of a haunted house. He knocked on the door of the house, which is Clonskeagh Castle, and asked the then owner whether he was prepared to sell the house to him. So the then owner actually agreed, surprisingly, and so immediately there was a big job of work transforming this historic structure into a family home. It was always a challenge that sort of quite a creative person such as my father relished, although my mother would have settled probably for an easier life involving less builders. But I think ultimately she enjoyed having the house as a place to host her friends and family. In my 30s I moved to the UK and took a job as a teacher out there and was working as a journalist. My father had to go in for a heart bypass, and at that point I decided to come home. I thought help him out with the house and do something with the house, even though at that time it was just after the banking crisis. It was a challenging period to do anything in Ireland, but nonetheless we had the idea of creating a kind of an alternative space, being open to the public. I suppose period about 10 years ago, when I was putting on food events and concerts, and Dad was doing his mediation, and it was still a family home. I suppose that was a very active period in the house. It'll be fondly remembered by musicians and concert goers for the occasions we put on here, and that will certainly be something that will be missed, and particularly the sessions that have developed after the concerts themselves. Before my father died, the house gained heritage status, and that kind of reacquainted us with the first builder of the house, Henry Jackson, who was a United Irishman from the north of Ireland, and a Protestant, and an industrialist who had an iron mill down by the river. And he was arrested a few years after he built the house, before 1798, so he didn't actually participate, but he still lost his property ultimately. And it was taken on by a man named Thompson, who extended it further into a bigger structure. So it's got that sort of identification with the 1798 rebellion, which I think appealed to me and my father. The sort of ecumenical aspect to that movement. Building a castle at the end of the 18th century is a slight absurdity and an affectation. So maybe there's a slight reservation around that. I was catering primarily at the start, and I had developed a great enthusiasm for producing what people now call vegan food. I wanted to get away from sort of divisive arguments about food, which maybe I was sort of participating in as a journalist. A friend of mine called Brian recognized that I could, quite efficiently produce food of a reasonable standard, and he proposed, a series of concerts. So, we had some really quite successful concerts. Brian sort of led it at the beginning, but we had some, people like Jimmy Stewart and Loa, who's doing very well nowadays. There were, great New Year's Eve occasions. I even got involved kind of tour managing a band called the Loafing Heroes. For a lot of musicians, it was a very important experience. They perform a concert and then it's over, and that's then it's kind of into a kind of impersonal sort of environment, the city or whatever. But after playing here, people let their hair down and chat, and where everybody at the end of the night is sort of becomes more intimate. In all the years of putting on events, never had any trouble. That was bizarrely, a very sort of loose door arrangement, barely checking people's tickets. It's no wonder financially it hasn't been very successful. But we never had sort of a doorman or, really kind of, emphasize the security aspect. And that goes for the kind of wider approach to the house. My dad was sort of almost superstitious about not locking the doors because you're only attracting people, and I think that maybe comes from his own family in the west of Ireland. A friend of mine is a man called Richard Wilson, who's now in his 90s, and he is this sort of slightly shambolic vegan character who wanders around with his recipes and tinctures and musical scores and whatever else he's carrying in his large set of bags. And he put on a performance here where he gave his best of his favourite classical music recordings, which he played on an ancient record player to an assembled audience, and that was again a very enlightening kind of encounter. Fergus Armstrong, who was a prominent solicitor throughout most of his life, a guy who wasn't born to great privilege, but worked very hard to become successful in his chosen field. But he was always a little bit, I would say, different. Was looking around, critically at what he was doing and what his firm was doing, and generally tried to kind of change the legal culture. And ultimately he was strongly attracted to the idea of mediation, and he used this house to bring people together and for what he described as the magic of mediation. In time, perhaps, the importance of mediation and maybe his role will be more widely recognized. He remains a guiding light to me and to the rest of my family. We have to give credit as well to our mother, who was a highly tolerant person and very receptive to new ideas. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the magazine Cassandra Voices that I founded along with a friend just about 5.5 years ago, I think it is now. I grew weary of attempting to write, of writing articles for publications that I didn't have a huge amount of respect for. Wanted to have control over the content of my article, so I thought, well, let's see if I can create an alternative media platform. The important thing about a media platform was to kind of be independent and to provide alternative viewpoints. It was really during the pandemic, probably the most challenging period for me as editor and journalist to distinguish truth from reality and propaganda from facts. I certainly would have engaged very closely with what we were being told and the science and the various papers, and I found myself very skeptical about what was happening, but also, you know, it was quite challenging to make those arguments because I knew that people had very fixed ideas. A certain narrative became dominant. But prior to that, we had, I suppose, more focus on environmental issues and social issues. I like to think we're probably getting back to that as well. I think it's taken me some time to get used to it. It's sad because you lose a connection to a place that contains a lot of memory. It's difficult to think of it not being our home. You know, it's very difficult for four siblings to agree to keep a house such as this when, you know, everybody has challenges. So, you know, I think you could say to yourself that you're sad about something and you know, remain sad about it indefinitely. Alternatively, you just have to kind of move on and embrace new challenges and new living spaces.